It's a funny thing Dave says to his friend. You know, when we were engaged, I would do the talking and my fiance would do the listening. When we got married, my wife would do the talking and I would do the listening. Now that we've been married a number of years, we both do the talking and our neighbors do the listening. Is conflict a good thing? Is disagreement healthy? Our Talmud tells us that no two people look alike, and therefore we need to realize that no two people think alike. And if we realize that, then it becomes obvious that there will be disagreements, there will be conflict. In fact, Judaism is the only faith where God and man argue. If you look at our basic Jewish books, whether it's the Mishnah or the Talmud or the Code of Jewish Law, it is filled with disagreement, with arguments. Two of the greatest rabbis that ever lived was Rabbi Yochanan and his brother-in-law Resh Lakish, and they would learn together. And when Resh Lakish passed away, Rabbi Yochanan was looking for a new study partner. But each rabbi didn't last that long, and they asked Rabbi Yochanan, why? What's wrong with the rabbis we've chosen to be your study partners? And Rabbi Yochanan said, you see, each rabbi that is now learning with me, all they do is agree with me. And they justify and they explain why my opinion is correct. I miss Resh Lakish. Resh Lakish, he would argue with me. He would disagree with me. He would point out the flaws in my line of reasoning and my logic. I miss him. On the other hand, rabbis tell us that one of the most evil kings that the Jewish people ever had was a king by the name of King Achav. During his times, the Jewish people, tragically, were a nation of idol worshippers. However, we are told that when they went to battle, they were always victorious. And the reason the rabbis gave for that was because there was tremendous harmony between the people. On the other hand, we are told during the times of the great King David, when the Jewish people were observant, served God, practiced their faith, many of them fell in battle, and the rabbis wondered, why is this so? And they explained, because unfortunately, the Jewish people at that time were not united. There was constant disagreement between man and his fellow man. In this week's portion, we read about one of the great conflicts that engulfed the Jewish world. It took place during the time of the Exodus from Egypt while the Jewish people were living in the desert. A man by the name of Korach, who was a cousin of Moses, led a rebellion against Moses and his brother Aaron, the Kohen Gadol, the high priest. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avot tells us that this conflict between Korach and Moses and Aaron is to be defined as a conflict that was not for the sake of heaven. On the other hand, the Mishnah records that two of the greatest rabbis who lived in the times of the Mishnah, Hillel and Shammai, their conflicts, their disagreements, should be defined as conflicts that were for the sake of heaven. And now we come to the million-dollar question. How are we to know whether a conflict, whether a disagreement is for the sake of heaven, or whether, God forbid, it is not for the sake of heaven? Because as we mentioned, there will always be conflict. You know what they say, 2 Jews, 3 opinions? Or this Jew who was stranded on a desert island, and while he was there, he built 2 synagogues. And when he was finally rescued, they asked him, Rabbi Yid, why did you build 2 shuls? To which he responded, that synagogue is where I pray in, and that one I would never walk in there if my life depended on it. When I was younger, I used to play a team sport. And I remember the coach one day saying, he said, fellas, remember, always play the ball, never play the man. Playing the man, when you seek to destroy, when you seek to belittle the other person, when it's simply a question of conquest, of you being victorious and the other person being the loser, as it was in the case of Korach and Moshe, then you know that that is a conflict that is not for the sake of heaven. However, when you play the ball, when you're only interested in discovering the truth, when you realize that ultimately both you and the person you are in disagreement with are on the same side. You both want to know what is the eternal truth. And you both show respect for each other. Then you're playing the ball. Then that is a conflict for the sake of heaven. I can recall the many years that I would stand by a Farbrengen, a discourse of the Rebbe, or through all of his literature, whenever he would have to speak about those who opposed some of his views, he never, ever would mention the individual by name. He would always speak to the concept, to the idea, never to the individual. You know, once there was an occasion that a rabbi had spoken out against the Rebbe. And then he realized that he misunderstood what the Rebbe said. And therefore he wrote to the Rebbe asking for forgiveness and hoping that the Rebbe would not be holding a grudge against him. To which the Rebbe replied and he said, "Holding a grudge against you? I don't have time to hold a grudge against you." The Rebbe attempted to inculcate this idea into the hearts of all of his followers, that we don't have time to bear grudges. We need to use every moment, every precious moment that we have to make the world a better place, to make the world more inclusive. Let us never ever forget what my coach told me so many years ago. Remember, fellas, he said, play the ball, never play the man.